Hi there, everybody. I'm Philip Heitzen, and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement podcast. Today's podcast is a conversation that I recorded just a couple of days ago with Christian Heinrich, a co-founder of ScoutBee and a professor of digital transformation at Quadriga University of Applied Sciences in Berlin, Germany. Now, if you haven't heard of ScoutBee before, they specialize in AI-enabled supplier discovery, sourcing, and onboarding, and as such, they've been at the forefront of their clients' response to the COVID-19 pandemic over the past few days. Well, in this podcast, Christian took some time out to share with us what he's seeing on the ground as companies look to secure short-term supply, what are some of the tactics and strategies they're taking, and also what some of those leading companies are starting to think about of what they need to do, what actions they need to take today to actually prepare for a return to some normalcy once the pandemic is contained. Well, I started the conversation with Christian by asking him, how did he get his start in procurement?
A long time ago. This sounds really long now. It's around about 12 years ago, I started working in a procurement consultancy. And we had typical topics on the agenda like supporting companies, small and mid-sized companies, but also internationals, multinationals, corporates regarding global sourcing issues, but also regarding how to structure your procurement organization. Do I differentiate between strategic sourcing, operational sourcing? Do I have a central department and a decentralized department? All those organizational topics, also process topics. And especially in the global sourcing initiatives, it became pretty clear to me that all the manual sourcings, which are then stored in an Excel base or in something like that database, which is not reused, at least not from a machine learning perspective, there must be some room for improvement. So this was the early beginning for me, starting really in consultancy. And then later I moved to the chemical industry company, BASF. And then I was in touch with various industries.
So what then became that inspiration for starting ScoutBee? You know, what was the gap in the market that you saw that you felt compelled that there was an opportunity for you to start a business supporting that gap, if you will?
Yeah, so it really should not sound arrogant or something like that, but it was just a little bit too boring to repeat the same sourcings, especially global sourcings, especially during my consultancy time, because then we had individual customers, so that's normal. But for example, let's take the case of finding suppliers for packaging or for machine building companies or something like that. And they were pretty similar, but we always stored this in Excel files. Then the project was done. Then the team members of the consulting team of the next client changed. And we had to start from zero again, writing technical specifications, sending out emails, storing the potential long list in the Excel file, handing it over in a PowerPoint or Access database to the client, and start again from zero. And this was at the end the real case where I just said, in terms of big data and machine learning, that's a kind of a repetitive process. And we should really think about how we can aggregate various data sources in order to deliver value to the procurement experts and bring this to the next level. Yeah.
So we're kind of recording this in very, it's cliche, it feels like at the moment to say uncertain times, but certainly uncertain times. I want to actually talk a little bit about what you're seeing, how you're seeing your clients respond to that. But before I go there, how's COVID-19 and the pandemic, how is it impacting you from a kind of professional, from a ScoutBee perspective? Are there things that have come up that you are not necessarily expecting, hurdles that you've had to face in the last week or two?
We experience massive outreach to us due to different reasons. So especially right now, companies are confronted with a lot of shutdowns and lockdowns, and they have issues in their supply chain. So there are the border issues, the typical transport issues, but also what we see day by day even more right now, if they think beyond the next 2 weeks. So let's think about May, June, and so on, what's coming on. They are already getting super panic regarding backup suppliers for the strategic, critical part suppliers. And this is something we are confronted with right now, that we should take care about finding sources, backup suppliers, and even only if they are really not used at the end. But companies make them ready, prepare them if the thing's going on, hopefully in a few weeks, and then they need to prepare it. Yeah.
Are you seeing that both from physical supply chain and what I'd call virtual supply chain? So services, there may be geographic based services where people don't have the ability to go into their office and therefore provide the service, or is the focus right now more on that physical movement of goods?
It's a very, very good question. I mean, based on our initial offer or general offer, what we have, let's say 70 to 75% really hardware-oriented, production, manufacturing-oriented topics on the agenda and sourcing cases. Around about 25% are service-oriented. I mean, in services, the transport chains, the supply chains are not that affected. That's clear. Yeah. There are some other organizational topics which are popping up right now because I think there are some of the smaller service providers are going to become bankrupt in the next week, so they may be not available anymore. So that's more this case in this area, where in the let's say 75% of the hardware-oriented sourcing topics, they are more regarding the transport, logistics, and the whole value chain itself, which is not stable anymore.
So I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about what are some of the actions that you're seeing, a lot of organizations kind of take as it's basically an emergency response right now as we're looking at, last week, this week, the coming couple of weeks or so. Where are they being successful in protecting themselves, mitigating risks, and driving stronger collaboration with their suppliers?
Well, that's a very good question. So first of all, as it is today, everybody's running regarding emergency sourcing topics and emergency supplies and so on. But I think this will heavily change in the next weeks, that they really look also much more forward. So that's then more the risk mitigation aspect. So right now, everybody really tries to secure the most relevant topics. But honestly speaking, we all do not know when sales is increasing again. I mean, that's then more right now really making everything safe for the next 2 weeks. But also we will see that the sales will go down for the next 2 months maybe or 3 months. So that will be this kind of I need to think about where is the critical part of my supply chain. Also, when I try to ramp up my production again in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks in order to meet the sales requirements. I think that's the strategic question everybody is confronted right now, and especially here, we can support regarding finding the backup suppliers for the critical elements of your supply chain. Yeah.
Now, would you say now is the time to be collaborating with suppliers, because that can sometimes be something that gets forgotten about when you're in times of crisis, but is, to me, when you look at long term, something that's super important. But are you seeing businesses think along that line, like we're all in this together, so we got to help each other? Or are you seeing organizations more looking at how do we protect ourselves? Is there a balance, maybe?
That is a good question. I compare it a little bit with the private life. I mean, there are some neighbors where you are willing to help, and there are some neighbors where you are not willing to help right now these days. I hope that it's more 80% where you are willing to support. Yeah. And it's at the end, how busy are the companies themselves with their own internal stuff and organization, and how much time do they spend with collaboration? And bring it back again, those suppliers who are not relevant for you as a company right now, there will not be a collaboration initiative right now. Yeah. But for those critical suppliers, for example, in the automotive chain, the tier ones and the OEMs, they at least talk very closely together. Nevertheless, unfortunately, we see in almost every case that the responsibility stays with every company by themselves. So at the end, cost-cutting, budget freeze, this is what we see very often, and it does not matter at the end to be very collaborative, unfortunately.
Yeah, I completely, that's what I see, and from my experience, I've got a lot of background in automotive tier one, and when you look at the supply chains, there's such systemic risk amongst all providers because it's such a community that's reliant upon each other. But in times like this, everyone is so strained that it's very difficult to even quantify the impact of decisions, when you're looking at the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 down in that supply chain. Now, ultimately, there could be one tier 4 supplier in the middle of, anywhere that's been impacted that is not available, that impacts the entire supply chain. But it's really hard for organizations right now to figure out what that weak link is. And until they figure that out, which is probably something that's not going to take place for a little while, the focus obviously isn't going to be there. The focus is on the things that are more obvious, that they can see today, the more immediate problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I can add here one comment, because this is exactly what's the case. And I mean, there was always competition, especially when we used this example of automotive and OEMs, but they were already in a very strong competitive market due to the change of the digital transformation and digital disruption. Mm-hmm. Right now, we see some individual players really using this also in order to get rid of not efficient business units and then restructuring, reposition things themselves. And this is even more, which makes it more complex to partner right now. I think, honestly, the opposite is happening right now. Everybody is focusing on their own competencies and rather thinking about reinventing themselves instead of partnering too much and being too tight connected to some supply chains. From a product mix perspective, they will maybe not exist in 6 months anymore. Yeah.
Optionality becomes the new kind of currency. That's the most important thing right now, is to have as flexible supply chains as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. Now, from a technology perspective, last time that a lot of, especially when we think about automotive manufacturers, any manufacturers that are out there, actually having to deal with an issue like this, I go back to the financial crisis that hit the automotive industry. I'm only using that as an example, but that hit it hard. You're dealing with a lot of these things by, emailing and picking up the phone and searching for suppliers on Google. So I'd love to know, here we are 12 years further on, and how is technology changing how an organization has the ability to rapidly respond to all these changes?
Yeah, I like this question and approach, because, we are coming out of this ERP age, I would say, and before the ERP systems, we had the business process optimization initiatives kicking off with Hammer and Champy in the 80s, I would say, and everybody of us knows all the process diagrams we had on our wall. Yeah. But then we moved to the ERP systems, and I grew up in an ERP world where the Oracles, the SAPs, and so on were pretty famous, and this was the latest trend. And then after this, all the SRM systems and e-procurement systems popped up, and also nice and also good. I expected, honestly, some years ago, that the collaborative part also to new potential suppliers to the outside world. So we do not speak only about the existing suppliers in the ERP systems and the data warehouse systems with the master data and the supplier data. We are talking about the external potential new suppliers, that this collaborative part is already done from an SRM system. But obviously, and this was another case besides the big data and the machine learning topic, why we founded ScoutBee 2015, because we say the collaboration part between production engineers, who are usually responsible for the technical specification, the procurement part internally, who are more responsible for the business part, and the potential new suppliers, which are not yet registered in your ERP system, that this is already done, but it is not obviously the case. So that's still not the case that it's done. And we focus heavily in our product Streamline and cover exactly this process, so that there's a seamless integration without sending emails. Right. Imagine you have a long list of potentials with 80 potential suppliers, and you get then 60 emails back, but this is just the first circle, and then you have 5 or 6 circles, so you have to send out 300, 400, 500 emails just for one RFP, and this is handled and managed easily right now with a one streamlined process on one platform without any emails and phone calls with ScoutBee.
I remember back in the day when your engineer would be looking for providers, I would be looking as the buyer for providers, or for stock or whatever it may be, and we're all kind of acting in isolation from each other. It wasn't necessarily a joined up effort. And so having that ability to basically make sure, I think, understand what everybody else is doing at the same time on its own has a lot of power. So you're not duplicating efforts in times like this when you really need every single minute and hour that you possibly can to be not duplicating efforts, because there's so much on the agenda to try and figure out.
Yeah, you can be much more precise right now with your requirements, and you do not need to repeat every question, because let's stay in this case. We have 80 potential suppliers on the long list, and maybe 80 questions are coming back from the companies back to your production engineer. So I guess he won't be happy to do the job of procurement, and answer all the 80 questions. So usually the questions are very similar, and that's why we make this kind of 10 minutes FAQ. So the production engineer usually has then only 10 minutes to respond to the same or similar questions, and all the 80 can on the platform then review the questions and answers, and then it's done. But the production engineer did not lose 80 or time for 80 emails. Right. They just used 10 minutes. And
So we talked about what organizations are doing right now, this week, next week, how they're starting to think about what happens in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whenever it is that companies start to come online, factories start working up again, and there's a recognition of where there are gaps in the supply chain that people aren't necessarily thinking about today. When we look further, so we get back to, and it's a hard notion to kind of think about right now because we're in the middle of it, but normalcy will resume at some point in the future. First of all, I want to ask, is anybody thinking about that right now that you're seeing of, what the things look like in 3 months? And then perhaps a follow-on to that is, what can we be doing to set ourselves up for success when normalcy resumes?
Yeah. So I hope that a lot of people are thinking about that. It's just a question if they have time to start or kick off already their initiatives. I mean, if I go back 3, 4, 5, 6 months, we had a lot of good discussions. There was not the COVID-19 coronavirus on the table. It was more, how can I transform my traditional procurement organization into a digital procurement organization? I think this is and this remains at the end. I mean, if they really start then in 2 months or in 3 months building or continuing with that thoughts and projects, that's another topic. But I would combine this. So what we had in discussions in the last month, and what I also think even more right now becomes necessary. First of all, you need to be proactive, and you need also to create a kind of an information advantage and the execution advantage. And it's not the thing that, you are the next brilliant automotive production company, or whatever OEM manufacturer. That's more, are you fast enough to deliver highest possible quality for the best price? I mean, the thing with the speed is new. I mean, price and quality was always the thing, but being the first, having identified the first battery supplier for a specific battery in this case, that's the USP then at the end, and that's why we have a lot of workshops with CPOs in the last month already, and in the last 2 years we started already some projects with our clients regarding thinking still in the category management approach. So let's say in the average we have between 8 and 20 categories per company. Depends heavily, and usually 80% of the categories are relevant for a scouting license, because then usually if you have the packaging or the interior or exterior category, you have round about 5 sourcing cases where you need to identify how the supplier market does look like for this part, how is the current competition situation. So we think every category manager should have this kind of scouting license, which is a Google, just for his B2B and category purpose, and then he has or she has around about 5 sourcing cases per year. That's what we foresee in order to become more fast in the reaction and proaction.
Yeah, you talk about speed. I think about the organizations that are going to come out of this ultimately stronger are those that have the flexibility, that they're able to build kind of a moat. I don't know if that's the right word, but build a moat around what their competitive advantage is. And that's because they're able to partner more closely with the most important, most like structurally important suppliers in their industry. Whether they're able to generate cash because they've moved quickly to invest in more competitive pricing, or whatever it is, that they're able to do to create and to distance themselves from the competition while everybody's catching up. And that in the industries that I think it goes cross industry. There's going to be some that are struggling obviously a lot more than others, but those that are in this kind of wait and see, and we still believe there's going to be growth, it's all going to be about how quickly can we use that to our advantage to create that gap between us and our competition.
Fully agree on that. And I mean, maybe I can add just that that's super important to react demand sensing oriented. Yeah. So we will not see this. Also, if you think in the next 9 months until end of this year, I mean, this will not be the case that 1st of May, Corona is done and everything is then going back to normal like we had it in January this year or in December last year. There will be some peaks and some lows, and there will be some restrictions, and it will need at least some time. This is that thing, but also later on, and this is then coming back, and I'm closing the circle with a topic regarding digital transformation of procurement. This will then be back at normal when we talk about 2021 and the next years. So because then we have still the issue that we have shorter product life cycles. Yeah. So at the end, it's similar regarding the sensing mode. I think I like this expression. They need to find the right mode, to be very, very fast in the decision making. Nevertheless, having good prices in the negotiations.
Yeah, and I'd love your opinion on this as well from a digital transformation perspective, like the transformation agenda. It feels like right now anything that's basically I can see investment in the continued digitization in a couple of areas. One is where it enables speed, and two is where it enables efficiency and that means redeploying resources in other areas, but it has an immediate ROI. If it doesn't have an immediate ROI because it doesn't immediately connect to obviously one of these the short-term challenges and objectives and goals that organizations have, then maybe it's something they'll be put on the back burner for 6 months. But if it's something that can address one of those key challenges that they're facing now, then there's no reason why investment in digital transformation won't continue.
And I hope that we super fast get out of the situation, because it's a traditional behavior. That's totally clear. I mean, I only invest in something if I see an ROI. But this is exactly does not work when you talk about digital transformation, because the ROI comes later. Yeah? We know it from the B2C platforms like Facebook. So Facebook in the beginning had no clue how they make money. Mm-hmm. Right now, I would say they are pretty valuable. Yep. And that's the same thing. I mean, for sure, we do not have to have 5 or 10 year ROI perspectives when we talk about business investments within procurement area or value chain area. But we should also be aware on if we invest in a software which also includes some change management and the people's behavior within our organization, it will need 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months until we see the ROI. Yeah? It's not such an easy case that I buy something and I get something out of it within 2 weeks. Yeah. But it is super important to have this in mind. And I think, especially in those times of crises and after the health crisis, we will see an economic crisis, but the strong and brave, as always, will survive at the end. Yeah, they will, with the foresight, they will survive at the end. Yeah.
Now, I want to start wrapping up, and I had a question because you're doing something at ScoutBee. I think that to kind of help the community get over this short-term crisis, and I would just wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it is that you are actually doing.
Sure. At the end, we are responsible to find the right and best information for supplier markets. So we call it scouting, digital scouting. That's fairly new. I think many of you know the typical end-to-end processes, which are purchase to pay, which are covered usually via the ERP system. Then the source to contract process, this is covered by the SRM system, and we are one step earlier. So we are covering the scout to source process. So always, if you have, for example, you want to find new suppliers, you want to find backup suppliers, you are ramping up a plant in another region where you do not have a long list or a short list for some topics and materials, or also for innovation topics. And this is where we provide the long list and the short list, and we screen the whole market globally, multilingual, include also specifications, include also ISO certifications, risk indicators, financial stability indicators, and then we provide you a long list. And based on the collaboration part on our platform, you can then funnel the potential suppliers down. Sometimes we have more than 1,000 potential suppliers in the beginning. You would never do contact individually. Right. You just do this on the platform because it's possible. Yeah. And then out of 1,000 potentials, you find the last 10 at the end, and then you get an initial quote, and then it's up to you. You start your negotiation process, you start your typical RFP process, and so on. But the result is much better if you start with 1,000 instead of starting with 30, because you can only do 30 manually.
And so I know that you're doing something really from an emergency perspective to support organizations through COVID-19. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what it is that you're doing and the support that you're providing right now.
Sure. Yeah. As I mentioned, our core competency is to find and identify suppliers for almost every requirement, from B2B production-oriented companies, but also NGOs, multinationals, governmental institutions, especially right now for healthcare providers, also for hospitals. And that's why we have kicked off an initiative internally this week. We call it COVID-19 support. And if you go to scoutbee.com, you'll find a special website for the coronavirus. You can also address your requirement directly to help@scoutbee.com, and then we will provide you support in these cases. If you are a traditional production-oriented company, you are facing kind of bottlenecks in your supply chain, especially of those emergencies, you can also go to our contact form on the website, and our team will directly support you and identifying new suppliers for your special case.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to include the links to those in the show notes page. Before I do that, I have one final question, and that's just, outside of the coronavirus crisis right now and the communications related to that, if folks would like to just get in touch, learn a little bit more about what ScoutBee does generally, perhaps connect with you personally, what's the best places and the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, we have, if you go to our website, scoutbee.com, we have different sections, and I think that's the most valuable thing if you are interested in general to walk through our case studies. So we have 2-3 case studies online, and also if you then are just simply interested in getting new material, we can send out videos. We can also initiate a kind of a demo call if you just walk through our contact form online on the website, scoutbee.com, and then we will get in touch with you.
Okay, great. Well, what I'm going to do, like I say, is I'm going to link to all the different places that you referenced today in the show notes for today's episode. And those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast. And for any listeners that go there, you'll find this conversation towards the top of the list. Just scroll down all the pods that you see, and all the details, all the links are going to be right there. So Christian, I just want to thank you so much, one, for what you're doing in support of the community right now in the COVID-19 response support, and secondly, just for joining me today to talk through some of these challenges and opportunities and what you're seeing in the industry. So thanks a lot for joining me today, Christian.
Thank you very much, and take care and stay healthy all.